Let's take a look at now at RB6 in the current rookie ADP. That is Ray Davis out of Kentucky. Another shorter back, we'll say 5'8", 211, 24 years old, 4.5 speed. This guy did have a little bit more experience as a receiver, right?
Yeah, and that's someone that has like top-notch elusiveness. I like his ability to make a guy miss. And that's what you need when you are looking at a back of shorter stature. You have the natural low center of gravity, and you're able to change directions rather quickly. The problem with Davis is the obvious one that you brought up is the age, right? So
Yeah.
you kind of wonder, okay, what's his ceiling? Can we get 4 years of high level play from him? And will teams overlook, his size and say, okay, if we get this guy in as an older player, where does he fit in? Is he more along the lines of a Dion Lewis or James White, or is it someone that we need to feed him carries? And I think that's a question that teams are going to have to ask themselves when they pick up a Ray Davis. But the vision, elusiveness, the ability to make a guy miss. He doesn't need volume, even though he got volume at Kentucky. So I think that kind of helps him out. But it's tough when you're thinking about let's say from a fantasy football perspective. I know it's year to year, but dynasty is like
Right.
looking at it long term. Okay, how much bang for my buck am I gonna get for a Ray Davis? Is it gonna be a grab and trade, grab and stash, or dash, or kind of like I can trust that he's going to be a guy for me for at least 4 seasons. So that right there is tough to call, but you like the talent. His is going to be really dependent on situation.
Yeah, and I think that's why it kind of surprises me that Davis is at 7 at this age, and maybe we're just early enough in the process where a lot of people aren't thinking that way. I almost think I'd like him better if he falls into day 3 and maybe falls a little bit in rookie drafts, because he does seem like the type of player, and I'll make kind of 2 different comparisons. First, we've had several of the day 3 backs who come in as rookies and really help a team out and make a fantasy impact. And then by year 2, they've been disappeared. Right? Then Thanos snapped the fingers. They're not really hugely involved in the NFL. But at Davis, at 24 years old, maybe a little more mature than some of the other guys, maybe more well equipped to come in and make an impact if there's an injury in year 1 and then kind of disappear. The other thing I was going to ask you about, we had 3 backs last year, and they're different types of running backs. They're different levels of skill, but we were talking about them as kind of a scale last year. Devon Achane, Keaton Mitchell, Jaleel McLaughlin. Like those 3 backs don't really still profile as the kind of guy that's going to touch the ball 20 times in a game very often, but they're so good on a per touch basis that they can matter for us in fantasy football with 10 or 12 touches. Davis can be that kind of guy, right?
Well, here's a special thing about Davis that it doesn't count for fantasy, but it kind of does count for fantasy because it's going to get his butt on the field. He is very good in pass pro.
Love
So
it.
we know teams love to trust guys that can block, right? He knows who to block, and he does a great job in getting in the way and executing the block. So that's going to get him on the field on third down and kind of have him sustain a role to where, okay, well, if he could block, okay, let's throw him a couple passes. Okay, wow, he can catch. We know he can run. Let's kind of leave him out there for a series or 2 and see how it goes, right? And that's how you kind of see those guys weave their way into a sustained role. Now, he's not as explosive as Keaton Mitchell. He's not as super dynamic as a Jaleel McLaughlin, but he's talented. He's well-rounded. He can catch. He can block. He's a smart football player. Just has to get a little bit stronger. But you can do that moving forward. But I like the fact that he can block. So maybe in that sense, he does have some fantasy value because we know that's going to get you on the field.
One of the things I've said in the past about somebody like DeAndre Swift is, and you noticed it in Philadelphia last year, if you've got a hole that's 5 yards wide, I want the ball in DeAndre Swift's hands because of what he's going to do with that open space. If I've got a hole that's like 6 inches wide, I'd like to have somebody else because they're gonna get into that gap. Is Davis? I've seen so many highlight videos of him just making a fool out of a defensive back or a linebacker in the open field. How does he do when things are a little bit muddier in tighter spaces?
Well, because of that elusiveness, and that's why I like DeAndre Swift that in that class. He was my
Yep.
RB1. And here's the thing, a lot of times coaching can coach the playmaking out of a player and say, "Hey man, you got to hit that hole."
Right.
But sometimes the playmaker's mindset is like, I can get around that hole and make it happen. We saw this.
Right.
We saw this clash with Reggie Bush and Sean Payton at first, when Bush was losing carries to a Pierre Thomas, or Deuce McAllister,
Right.
who was excellent, by the way. But was like, man, you drafted Reggie because he's Reggie. Like, he could do that. You know, the average back can't. But Ray Davis, I feel like, is shorter, smaller enough to where he can squirt through the hole. You see this a lot with Blake Corum too.
Yeah.
Like, he can find a way to make a way, through a muddy area. But it's, you hope he goes to a coach that doesn't coach the playmaking out of him, because you see that a lot.